Hello, my friends, and welcome to We the Game Changers. I'm your host, Beth Knox, and today we're talking with Seahawks legend and Seattle business leader, Doug Baldwin Jr. Doug Baldwin Jr. grew up in Florida and graduated from Stanford University before signing with the Seattle Seahawks as an undrafted free agent in 2011. During his 8-year career, Doug won a Super Bowl and played in 2 Pro Bowls. He led the NFL in touchdown receptions in 2015 and was a leader both in the league and the locker room around social justice issues. Most notably, Doug was the 2013 Seahawks Man of the Year, a board member of the Players Coalition, a 2018 Muhammad Ali Sports Humanitarian Award finalist, received an honorary doctorate of humane letters from Seattle University, and was the 2022 recipient of the Seattle Sports Commission's Paul G. Allen Humanitarian Award as an impactful sports figure, creating positive change in Washington State. Now, since his retirement from the NFL, Doug has transitioned to business entrepreneur and is actively involved in bettering the community through his companies under Vault 89, at his Family First Community Center, as a co-founder of Champions of Change, and so much more. We have a lot to cover with Doug's multifaceted disruption and leadership journey, so let's get to it. Thanks for joining us for We the Game Changers. Doug, I am so happy that you've joined us today. Really appreciate you being here.
Of course, thanks for having me.
You are actually filling an important role. You're our first male guest on
really?
We the Game Changers.
Well, I will take that honor with, well, actually, I don't know how I'm going to take that, actually.
It's an honor, of course. No, we're really excited to have you on this episode. Doug, you've made a massive impact across your career, and it's been inspiring, truly, to watch your leadership style evolve and develop. You've influenced the first Washington sports and now the greater community as a co-founder of Champions of Change nonprofit, founder of Vault 89, founder of Family First Community Center in Renton, not to mention all the advocacy work that you do for incarcerated individuals and our mental health community. So let me start with a thank you. I do so appreciate all the work that you do. And I know you prioritize empathy and compassion in your leadership style. We can certainly see that in the work that you've done and the impact that you've had here in Seattle. So I'd love to know more about what got you to this point before Seattle. So looking back, what was a moment where you first stepped into your leadership voice? And I'm curious if that surprised you or if it felt like a natural transition from where you were evolving.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if there's ever been a singular moment in time. I think there's just been multiple opportunities where I've had the opportunity to step into more of a leadership role and use my voice and influence in various ways. So I wouldn't say there's a specific, situation or moment, but I've been surrounded by individuals and folks who have poured into me and who have encouraged me to speak up and use my voice, and then also have guided me when, in those moments where I needed to hush and not be as vocal. But I think at the end of the day, I'm just, I'm navigating this world just like everybody else. I feel strongly about certain things. I believe strongly about certain things, or in certain things. And as a father and as a husband, I want to be able to speak up to those things. And especially as a father of 3 daughters, I want to model for them that they can use their voice, that they can speak up, and that they have a place in this world to influence this world for the betterment of, not only themselves and their future children, but also the generations that come after them.
And to that point, just again curious, you've had so many leadership opportunities and you have embraced those along the way. At what point did you acknowledge to yourself that you were a leader?
If I'm being honest with you, probably about a month ago.
Okay, yes, fair.
Yeah, there's, I don't know, I feel like it's just the process of getting older, right? And maturing and recognizing that I do have a role to play in the bigger picture. I think for a long time I was hesitant to own that role as a quote-unquote leader, and I don't really know fully how to define leadership globally just yet. I think and I say globally, not necessarily globally, but like, and the permanence and the all of the environments that I touch, how do I show up as a leader? And quite honestly, I think it varies from environment to environment. Really, it's about how do I come in and show who I am, be authentic, be the most authentic version of myself, but also add value to that environment that I'm stepping into.
Right.
And so I've been, and maybe this is also just my playing style as an athlete as well. I like to show up and be kind of the Swiss Army knife. What do you need?
What do you need today?
Right.
In this moment.
Right. Exactly. And so that's, again, it's been modeled for me. I've had a lot of mentors in my life who have showed me that that is possible. And then what happens when you do show up that way, if you have that skill set and if that is your desired leadership style. And so I've modeled that, and probably in the last month I've owned it as who I am and what I know to be true about myself. And so I'm honing in on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, it was sometime in my 20s, late 20s, my father passed away unexpectedly, and I was back home with my siblings, and I'm the fourth out of 5 kids. And as we were making decisions around the funeral and all of those elements that involved, my siblings kept turning to me saying, "Beth, what do you think we should do?" And I was so caught off guard by that. So we made decisions. I helped lead it, and everyone, as you can imagine, responds differently in those circumstances from an emotional standpoint.
Right.
And I was kind of the strong one that made decisions. And it wasn't until later that I could reflect back on that and say, okay, I think this is maybe who I'm supposed to be, is that person. So it's informed so much of what I've done since.
Yeah, and that resonates with me. I think if I look back and reflect on my childhood, there have been a number of times where adults had looked at me as like, hey, what do we do here?
Right.
And I think the reason why that didn't necessarily pop up to mind when you mentioned the question, because that's been normal for me.
Right.
So it's not something that's foreign to me. It's not something that, it's been a part of my life for a long time. And I think when I get in these environments and people are asking me, hey, what do we do here? Like, that's not, it's normal. So I don't really take that as, but I think this year specifically, and certainly in the past few months, and certainly in the last month, it's become pretty evident to me that, people are looking to me and asking me to be in this leadership role. And if I zoom out and look at the totality of what that means, I can't take that lightly, and so it's a I don't want to say it's a burden. It is a responsibility, but it's one that I do not take lightly, and one that I actually look forward to, because again, I do have strong beliefs and at this stage in my life and experiences, a strong understanding of who I am and what value I add to the world.
And I think that we underestimate the amount of energy that it takes if we're resisting that or not fully embracing it. Once you embrace it and say, this is who I am, then you're able to use that energy in other more productive ways.
For sure.
So,
for sure.
So interesting. Now, Doug, sports have been a major part of your life since you were young, as you've said. Seattle certainly knows your football skills, and you also competed in track and field. What were your earliest sports influences, and how did they impact your professional development?
Yeah. I grew up in Pensacola, Florida, so I had a lot of examples. Derek Brooks, Emmitt Smith, Roy Jones, just to name a few. And these were all extraordinary athletes and quite honestly, top of their craft in their peak. And so I had seen excellence when it comes to sports in my backyard. And so, witnessing that and then obviously celebrating that as a local fan of those individuals, and also just giving them credit. They carry themselves with a professionalism that, a lot of, that was to be admired and appreciated,
Right.
And as a young athlete, seeing that and watching that and, really learning through osmosis, because I didn't know about it consciously at the time, but watching them as they navigated the world and the decisions that they made, and then the decisions that they made after they retired, that it was a great influence on me. And so I think not only having those models as, what it takes to be successful in your sport and at your craft, and the work that it requires to elevate that, but then also how do you navigate that business world with grace and with elegance and professionalism, and then how do you actually transition from being at the top of your sport to then retirement.
Right.
I got the full blueprint right in front of me from athletes that were in my backyard. So
Sure.
Incredibly grateful for those experiences and for those models, and I'm still navigating and figuring it out myself right now.
We all are. Right?
Yeah.
'Cause it always is changing.
It is.
So now
Never-ending journey.
You've worked with at least two incredibly impactful coaches, Jim Harbaugh at Stanford and Pete Carroll while at the Seahawks.
Yes.
For the good and the challenging.
Yeah.
What have you taken away from your coaches that has been game-changing advice, or perhaps a moment that you shared with them that influenced how you operate today?
It's a very good question. I think, you named two coaches who couldn't be more opposite of each other, right? In the culture that they built. And I think that's what I took away from both of them, and still to this day lean into, is just culture in an environment, in a work environment, is so critical to getting the most out of the people that are in that environment. And I know of two ways that you can create culture. One, you can create a culture where there's a common enemy, where the team has to go and feels compelled to go compete against that common enemy. Or you have a culture where everybody buys into love and compassion and a responsibility to each other and accountability to each other, and then you go out and you do hard things because you care about the person next to you, right? I got to see those differing cultures throughout my entire life. And so now, as I'm building teams and building culture in our organizations, I lean really heavily into the love component. And if you've heard me speak, you've heard me say it, to me, the answer is always love. And love can mean a number of different things to folks. I don't know how deep you want me to get into it today, but I have a very clear definition of love, what that means to me. And then how we incorporate that into our culture is really trying to see the individual that is in our culture for the individual that they are. We respect and love them regardless of their background, regardless of their ethnicity, their cultural background, their sexual orientation, because, excuse my French, none of that shit matters, right? You're a human being at the end of the day on this planet that's spinning around the sun trying to survive and thrive. And if we see each other for that, and we give each other honesty, curiosity, and grace, I think we open up capacity for the best of our individual selves, and then collectively we can go out and do really, really hard things, and be successful at attacking those hard things, and then making a pretty significant impact in the world around us.
When you talk about the different cultures, it's something throughout my career, I've had lots of interns or young professionals working for me, and I've always encourage them to accept the things that they don't like, or that they did a bad experience, whether they hated their job at Seafair perhaps, or wherever whatever the case is, and sometimes it isn't a fit.
How could you hate your job at Seafair?
I know, right? That's what I would say. But the idea of recognizing, okay, this work is not for me. That's as informative as saying this work is for me, or this culture is a good fit, this feels right, or this culture is not. That informs where you go in the future. That informs your future decisions.
Agreed.
So having the negative experiences, my point, that's just as valuable as the positive ones. So, well, thank you for sharing those stories. Now, I understand that your time at Stanford also wasn't 24/7 smooth sailing. You had some really tough moments, and at one point you nearly transferred, but a conversation with your mom was a reset button for you. Apparently she gave you some tough love, I understand, and some honest perspective. So at one point or another, I think we all arrive at that pivotal moment where we're ready to quit, or we hit a breaking point. So as a result of that moment with your mom, how do you now cultivate the mindset and the relationships to seek and receive tough love?
being honest, I'm still learning.
Yeah.
You know, and as a father of 3 daughters,
now you're on the other side.
and they're kicking my ass every day.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm a flawed human being that is trying to figure it out every day. And what I do know to be true is that the valleys are just as important as the hills, right?
Yeah.
I used to always have this saying, like, you never really lose, you either win or you learn. And that has served me well for a very long time. However, I would say that to get to the next level of that, it's you learn and you learn. Whether you win or you lose, you have to take those lessons that come with both, right? Because it's easy to rest on your laurels when you win, and it's easy to hide the mistakes and the flaws when you win because you're exuberant about the win. However, if you can dive into the details of the win and figure out, why did I win, right? How did we get to this this destination of, you know, quote unquote winning, and then also from the losses, what caused us to lose. But also there's some valuable nuggets of, like, man, that was a loss, but like that was really fun.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed the process to get to where we were. Even though the outcome wasn't what we wanted it to be, we still learned some valuable lessons. And then you take those lessons and you apply it to the next thing that you do. And so I've learned over time, you know, and I'll use the analogy of working out. Everybody knows when you work out, you tear muscles, right? It's necessary for your muscles to get stronger, for you to grow. You have to have those tears that happen. And so when we talk about it in terms of the work that we do and the culture we have as an organization, I say it this way: you can never know light if you don't know darkness. You need the contrast. And so that hard love, that tough love sometimes is just pointing that out. Hey, you have to go through this struggle, this quote unquote suffering that you're feeling. Once you get through this, and if you get through it in a healthy way and you're able to appreciate it at the end, that is going to be the contrast that then shows you how much love and how much joy you can experience in this world. And if you don't have those, how would you ever know? And so to your point, I think it's vitally important that we go through life, yes, accepting the soft and the joyful moments that love can bring, but also appreciating and recognizing that there's so much value in the struggles and in the suffering that we inevitably will experience as human beings on this planet too.
Well, and to your point about being a parent with your daughters, and I know I've experienced this with my sons, that there's it's an easy inclination to want to make it easier on them. We don't want to see our children suffer or be disappointed or hurt, or whatever the case is. And it's so tempting because we know we can solve a lot of those problems. We can pave that path for them and help them avoid that. And then they haven't developed the coping skills, the torn muscle that makes them stronger. And it took me a while to really appreciate that I wasn't doing them any favors by making life easier. So the tough love, or just allowing them to suffer at times, is part of the developing the coping muscle that we all need.
For sure. One example I'll give you too is I've got a 23-year-old brother. We're super close. He was just in town, and we were talking about some of those struggles that he's going through as a 23-year-old young man. And the analogy he used was that, you know, he has this nail that he's trying to nail into this piece of wood, but he doesn't have a hammer. You know, so he's using his hand to try to put this nail in there. And it's like, for him, it's such a painful process. He feels stuck because the nail's not really moving. His hand's hurting because he's trying to hit this nail with his hand, right? But once he removes, you know, this stiffness of trying to do it his way, and he goes and does the work to get a hammer, right? Then he's going to hammer that nail in. He's going to recognize how much easier it is to nail that nail in. But then at some point, that nail's going to be hammered in, and then he's going to move on to the next thing. But right now, he's stuck with that nail, you know. And so, to your point, that tough love, that the struggle that you go through, just as everybody goes through in life to evolve and advance and progress, it's necessary. And so same with my children. I want them to have a healthy dosage of struggle so that they can build those muscles for whatever comes in their future.
Oh, thanks for sharing that story. Good on your brother for having that analogy and recognizing that growth.
Very wise young man.
Oh, good for him. Now, your teammates on the Seahawks and other teams have spoken about your ultra-competitive nature.
Me? No.
I know.
No.
It's true. That's what I've heard. There's the quote, a chip on both shoulders. And you've shared over the years how the context of your life and family dynamics, nature and nurture all played a role in creating that competitive spirit. And you've also talked openly about going to therapy and working through some of that context. So I want to know, what era of Doug Baldwin Jr. are you currently in? Because self-discovery is never a never-ending process. We know that. And I'm curious where you sit with things today. Do you feel like you've loosened those chips, or are you applying that energy to other spaces in your life in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I'm still a work in process. So this era, I would say, is I'm growing my wings. My mom told me a long time ago, I think it was probably a long time ago, 2016, 2017, where I did an interview and she saw where I said, I don't have a chip on my shoulder, I have a boulder on my shoulder. And she felt compelled to tell me.
As only a mom could say.
As only a mom could say. She told me, why not, instead of having a boulder on your shoulder, why don't you have wings? Because a boulder, a chip on your shoulder is weight, it weighs you down, whereas wings will help you fly higher. That never left me. I didn't understand what she meant at the time, because I was so fixated on the competitive nature that I had developed over those years. But yes, as a father, as a husband, and as my work expands and becomes more diverse, I'm recognizing that, there's a certain time and element where that competitive spirit can come out and be very effective and beneficial. But there are other times where I can be a little less competitive and a less front-facing with that competitive spirit, and really kind of sitting back and letting things absorb and play out and have a more reflective observer's view, and then insert myself where it's most effective and most efficient. I found that to be more effective, but also, to what you said earlier, it requires less energy of me. So then I can show up more present and more myself in more spaces that then benefit not only the environment that I'm in, but also myself.
Right.
And so I would say this era is really figuring out the balance between having that competitive spirit and really having more of wing-like appendages rather than boulders or chips on my shoulder.
Yeah, I imagine it takes a bit of discipline to allow yourself to let go at times of that competitiveness.
Yeah, that's the phrase I would say, letting go.
Yeah.
Letting go. A good friend of mine, she describes it as trying to grasp onto air. Right? When you're trying to grasp on the air, you get frustrated because you can't control it. Right? And so letting that go and allowing myself, my being, to just go with the flow and accept what is, still, wanting to influence in ways that I feel like I can be influential, but not so much trying to control every aspect of my environment, and really just appreciating everything in the beauty that is in, I don't want to say the flaws, but kind of in the flaws themselves, because there is some brilliance and a lot of lessons learned in those struggles.
Well, I can see where your brother came by his wisdom. Your mom obviously has a lot of that too. So continuing on that thread, your family background is such a melting pot, really. You've referenced in previous interviews military grandparents. Your dad was a black police officer in the South. Your mom was an activist, and your family heritage comes from black and Filipino roots. And you've spoken about your childhood often, the rough moments and the trauma, as well as the joy and peace. What has that taught you about considering the whole person when working on a team or with someone with far different personality types than you?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I've realized in reflecting on all of that you just mentioned was that you have to take into account the whole human. And each human has gone through a journey that forms their worldview. And if you can be, and this is how we operate as an organization, this is how I operate as an individual. I got 3 values/rules of how we operate. Number 1 is be honest. Number 2 is be curious. Number 3 is be forgiving. And those 3 things really are trying to take into account the whole human, right? Honesty is just a posture of respect. I got to be honest with you about who I am and what I'm about, because in order for us to have a real relationship, you got to know who the real Doug Baldwin is, right? And so I have to be honest with you about who I am. But also when I look in the mirror, I have to be honest with myself of who I am. Who I say I am and who I want to be. When I look in the mirror, am I actually being those things? And am I striving to be what I say I want to be, right? And if I'm not, or if there's some ambiguity in that, then I got to be curious. And curiosity is just a posture of humility, because again, none of us have all the answers. We're all trying to figure it out every day. We're all works in process. And so if I can remain curious and find good questions that then lead me to better questions, then I can find more of the real depth of who I am, what you are about, and how we can collaborate and work together as effectively and as efficiently as possible, right? And then because we're all humans, we're gonna make mistakes, right? We're gonna screw up. We have to be willing to give each other grace. And when I say grace, I don't necessarily just mean for other people, but also mean for ourselves. So, you know, one of the things that I know to be true about me is I'm very hard on myself. Ironically, my mom and I were talking about this not too long ago, a couple days ago. Like when I would watch film of, you know, practice of a game, you know, other people objectively would be watching it with me and be like, oh, that was a great catch, or that was a great this, or you know, all the positives. But what I saw was the negatives, right? Like, man, I missed my foot placement there, or I didn't hit my depth there, or, you know, I almost dropped that pass. I need to put my hands in this. So I'm learning from all of these things, which is a positive, but I'm also not celebrating like the hard work that was required to get to that place. And so finding that balance now, right? And trying to give myself grace in this process, it's a new element for me. But those three things, right? Being honest, being curious, and being forgiving, giving grace, that's how I want to operate in the world. And that's how I feel like I can be most effective and bring my most truest form into the world. And so I want to lead with those things. And I don't know if that answers your question. But
no, absolutely, it does. And you know, your point about also allowing the celebration to learn from that piece of it, that really resonates with me. You know, I think when someone is ambitious and driven, they are always learning, trying to learn from what the mistakes were, what they could have done better. And I know that I forget to celebrate the successes, or even with my team, and because I'm always looking at what's the next thing we have to do. But we can learn from the successes if we take the time to acknowledge and celebrate them and enjoy that moment of this went really well and why. Okay, let's repeat that again so we can have more of those.
But I would say that's really tough. It's really hard to do. And you know, I'm not just saying that you and me. Like I remember Derek Jeter in his retirement interview. That was one of the things that stood out to me. They asked him, if you could go back, what would you do differently? And he said he would celebrate the small victories, the wins.
Right.
But I think as a competitor, and you know this, as a true competitor, whether it's in sports or in business or whatever field you're in, if you're truly competitive, when you get the win, you're thinking, okay, how do I do this again?
Yes.
And it's an immediate thought. And I remember that very specifically when we won the Super Bowl and the confetti's falling, and I'm like picking the confetti up, and I'm just like, man, we won the Super Bowl. I want to go do this again.
Yeah.
You know, and so my mind already started calculating, okay, we got off season, I'm gonna start training this time, you know, and like, so I didn't really get to absorb that moment. But again, I'm thinking if you are in that mind frame, it's really hard to get out of that to enjoy those small victory moments. But I also think if you're a competitor in that way, like that's how you are successful in that realm. So there's a balance, a hard balance.
It is a hard balance.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit, I mentioned earlier the role, the therapy that you've done. What role does therapy and the focus on mental health play across your companies and in the way that you support your employees and colleagues? And I'm curious if that's helped you recognize moments where additional care or consideration is needed when a colleague is experiencing a tough time. So is our workplace open to acknowledging when someone's having a hard time? And you know, it feels like it is getting better about that.
Yeah.
But I'm curious how it is in your business.
Yeah, I mean, we make it a point. Self-care is vitally important, and I include it in the level of standard of excellency that I request and require, right? I tell the team all the time, like, look, I demand quality. the organizations that we work with, the partners that we work with, the people that we serve, they deserve quality in our work. But in order for me to demand quality from you, that means you got to take care of yourself.
Right.
That means you have to be the healthiest version that you can be, so that when you come to this table, you bring the healthiest, most authentic version of yourself. And that requires you to do some self-care. And so it's obligatory in our environment, right? You have to do it. And the team knows, like, our policy is that, you know, when you need that time, you take that time. And there's no questions asked about it. Like, if you need that time, you take that time. Now on the flip side of it, you know, you still got work to do, right? And so the expectation is that you still get your work done, but the quality of your work is directly reflective of how the quality of your life and who you are as a human. And so I want to get the most out of my teams in that way. And so yeah, it's we make it a point. Each individual has their own process in which they do that, right? And so we encourage them to explore what that process is for them, and then actually go do it. So it is vitally important. And I know that from my own experience, as you mentioned, like going through counseling and therapy and having the time and capacity to reflect on all of the things that I've experienced and still going through that process. But I think a lot of times when you're in a space where you feel the pressure of just surviving, right? And I know survival is kind of a, you know, that word can mean a lot of different things.
Sure.
But
It's
when
subjective.
but when you feel like you're in survival mode, you don't have the time and capacity to think about other things,
Right.
especially self-care, right? And so it's important for me that I give our team time, space, and capacity to think about what's best for them individually, because I do know it to be true that when I did that for myself through therapy and through counseling, my vision and my perspective was opened up to then I could see, how best do I serve my wife? How best do I serve my children? And so with that time and capacity, I become a better human and a better person to be around, right? And so the same goes for the work environment. If I can get the best out of my people where they feel whole and healthy, then they're going to show up to the work whole and healthy, and the quality of our work is going to be better. We haven't necessarily dialed in the data to calculate that just yet.
Okay.
But I think all of our partners would tell you that the work that we do is above and beyond, you know, the experiences that they've had otherwise. And I think it's because our team brings their best, the best versions of themselves to the work.
Because they can, because you
Because
give
they
them
can.
that space.
Yeah.
You know, I think we're fortunately in a better time, I think, in generally speaking, in business, where we have a little bit of flexibility. Many of our businesses it's not absolutely 9 to 5 or 8 to 5. So if someone needs to take time for whatever the need is in the morning, and then they work a little later in the evening, it goes back to what you said, as long as they get the work done and take care of themselves. And I also think we're in an interesting time now about how do we recognize in each other that you look like you're struggling today, or what, you know, you look like life isn't good for you right now. How can I help? You know, especially when we look at what's happening at a national level, there's that feels like it is declining. Care for each other and really addressing some of those needs. And I think it's making it feel comfortable and acceptable in the workplace to check in with each other and allow ourselves to be vulnerable.
It's a great point, and it actually was the foundation of one of our projects. So I don't know if you remember the Uvalde shootings that happened in Texas several years ago. So after that happened, our team came back to the office, and you know, several of us were parents, and so it kind of rocked our worlds a little bit. And you know, for the first time, right? Because we were new parents, young parents, and so you're seeing that happen from a different perspective for the first time. A lot of us could not touch the idea of losing a child, right? Like that's just we couldn't get there. However, you know, on TV you could see these children were coming. They had to come back to school, and that to me was like, man, how do you do that? How, like, as a child who went through that traumatic experience, how do I ever feel safe in my school again? And so the question came up, like, who's checking on these kids? And so we developed a platform where we're piloting in a few schools now, and we're looking to expand here in the next few months, Kids come into school and they're asked 3 questions. How are you doing today? How was sleep last night? Did you eat today? Very surface level questions that kind of get to at least can start the conversation about some other things that are going on. And then we aggregate that data and we show it to teachers, counselors, and administrative staff as a whole so they can see how the student body is doing in real time.
Right.
And then make better informed decisions for their students. I think it's no different in the work environment, no different just in life in general. When you have a friend or somebody who checks in on you, just asking you a simple question of, hey, how are you doing today?
Right.
And when they ask you, that they see something in you that's prompting that question. It's really that is another form of love. It means you see me, right? You're taking the time to see me. That within itself holds so much value. And then if you add the other resources and then, the techniques and tactics that I learned in therapy and in counseling, right? If you add all of that together, then you're creating an environment where folks can feel whole and feel healthy and feel seen in all the things, which again, I come back to just saying it's just love.
Yeah.
And I don't mean love in a very, in a romantic way.
No, I fully understand what you're referring to. And I think that question that is a sincere, how are you doing today, is very different than, hey, how you doing? Where we don't really want to know the details. But having someone ask that question and mean it and want to hear, even for 1 minute, being able to share that, just like, okay, I'm not alone.
Exactly.
And that's the key.
Exactly. And I think, we didn't know it at the time, but what I think we were feeling the underlying vibrations is that there's this sense of loneliness that we're feeling in community and in society. And even so much so, I think I forget the position, but he came out recently, probably a few months ago, saying that loneliness is an epidemic that we need to address.
The U.S. Surgeon General.
The Surgeon General.
Last year, yes.
And so, to your point, all of these small touch points that seem minuscule in the grand scheme of things, when you add them all up, they do point us to more connection, which I think the world obviously is craving for, but I think humans in general will always be craving that. We are designed for connection, and when that connection is not there, when you don't feel connected to the people around you, your environment, your community, you feel lonely. And so, to your point, that simple, how are you doing today? That can mean so much to somebody and you don't even know it. Yeah.
I love that. So, Doug, you were a leading figure in recent sports history to leverage your platform on social issues. I think back to the 2023 Sports Star of the Year awards show when you presented Megan Rapinoe with the Paul G. Allen Humanitarian Award that you had previously won. And you talked about a phone call you had with Megan about her kneeling during the national anthem to bring awareness to racial injustice and police brutality. Taking a stand like that as a leader around controversial topics can really put you in the spotlight, as I know you are aware. You could stand to lose a lot. What would you say to people who are navigating their principles and their livelihoods, whether it's talking to their employer about adopting more environmentally friendly practices or trying to introduce resources that would create more equitable circumstances? There's a lot of things that we can do to make our world better, but that put us into that uncomfortable place. What advice would you give those folks?
Know your why. Know your why. And part of that is knowing who you are too, right? And I think that's a continual journey. Things change, life changes, and you're always going to be asking questions of, okay, how do I show up my most authentic, best version of myself in this next phase of life? But I think to answer your question, you got to know who you are. You got to know your why, right? Again, you mentioned this earlier. My father was a police officer in Pensacola, Florida for 35 years. A black man in the South, police officer. He got it from both sides. The black community, seeing a black male wanting to be a law enforcement officer at a time where, there's so much tension in the community. It didn't sit well, right? But then also in a department that was predominantly white and in the South, infer what you want from that, that was a hardship for him too.
Sure.
But he knew his why, and he understood why he was doing it. And, he battled through both sides of it to truly remain true to who he was. And he showed me that on a day-to-day basis, as a child growing up. And then now I didn't see it as this way when I was doing it, But in those moments where I'm standing up for what I believe in, for what I know to be true for me, I'm modeling that for, young athletes and for my daughters in a lot of ways. And so so knowing that propels me even more to do the work that we do and to stand up for things that I believe in and that our team believes in very strongly, is because we know we have young eyes that are looking at us and wanting us to model something that gives them hope for a better future. But then also we have to do the work to build that better future for them, right? I feel very convicted about that. As, again, a father of 3 daughters, this oxygen that I'm breathing, I feel is a gift and is a blessing. And so with that gift, I can't waste it. So I gotta do something.
Right.
And so I gotta make this world a better place for my daughters, even though that may not be the case, because, if I'm being honest, my faith does not tell me that that's what's gonna happen. But again, if I'm breathing this oxygen, I gotta do something, and so I'm gonna work towards it.
Yeah, it's a real motivator, no question.
It is. And so knowing your why, so that you feel the confidence and the freedom to step out on what you believe in, regardless of the consequences, it makes it easier to do so, because you've already done the calculations. Now, granted, that doesn't mean that something's not going to surprise you, right? Because it did surprise me when we stepped out and became very strong advocates for police and community relations to be better. There was some strong opponents to that. And
Right.
what I did realize in that process, though, is that I think those strong opponents, they didn't know who I was or my why. And so I needed to do a better job of articulating that so they could understand. We had an opportunity in this process. There's a police training academy in Burien. It's for the entire state. So
Sure.
Every law enforcement officer, they go through this academy before they go out to the rest of the state. I spent 8 months with the leaders of the training staff there. There may be some of them that are going to watch this, and I don't want to name any names, but there was one guy specifically that when we got there, he was adamantly opposed to us being there. And I spent a great deal talking to him. And again, it was just a situation that he didn't know who I was. He didn't understand my why. And then when I started to explain to him, like, hey, my father was 35 years in the police force, right? So I come from that perspective and that foundation. I know as a son of a law enforcement officer that every police officer that puts on that badge and then puts on that gun to go out to work, they're hoping that they come back home safely to their families and to their children, right? I know my dad wanted to come back home safely. The community want the same thing. Any interaction with law enforcement officers, they hope that they can go home safely. We all want the same thing. So how do we get to understanding that we all want the same thing and then act accordingly so that we all go home safely, right? So understanding your why and then being able to articulate that to somebody very concisely and very clearly, I think it moves the needle. And it I don't want to say it, I say it this way. You do that doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to win the game, but it gives you a chance. And in life, I think that's one of the most important things you can have, is a chance.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of We the Game Changers, a production of the Seattle Sports Commission with support from Metamora Productions. Please subscribe to We the Game Changers on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.